We are going to get started this morning on our topic around creating a polished presence. Today, what we're going to talk about is several different aspects of creating a polished presence. So first up, does your body language convey your leadership, and how might it or might it not do that? Secondly, are your speaking skills ready for the C-suite and global conversations? Many of us are part of global companies going global, etc. What visual cues is your appearance conveying? So we're going to be talking about it, this whole polished presence from these different aspects. On our panelists this morning, we want to make sure to welcome Kelly Goering, who is here as a certified project manager, speaker, and specialist in the area of intercultural etiquette. And she is a protocol trainer. She's been trained in cross-cultural communications, and she's got some great examples about what works well and what does not work well in your corporate and business etiquette and being a little bit more culturally aware and sensitive. Dana Lynch comes to us as a certified image expert. She and I have known each other for years. She's a speaker and an author to a lot of different corporate settings and for executives who are looking at the image from the attire perspective. How are you getting dressed? She specializes in working with attorneys, CPAs, financial planners, and other professionals heading into leadership roles, especially into the C-suite, that have to really up their game. Kevin comes to us from Bates Communications, and they actually have an executive presence indicator, which is an assessment around how well or not so well your personal presence is showing up in terms of several different criteria and factors. He has worked with hundreds of different executives and teams to design and implement various leadership learning processes and organizational change initiatives with that focus on executive presence. So he's got, again, a lot of fun expertise in that area. Kevin, for you, how did you get into consulting around executive leadership, executive presence? How did that all get started for you?
This got started when I joined the company that I work for. And so what I kind of realized, we have a particular definition of executive presence, which is the qualities of a leader as seen by others that engage, inspire, align, and move people to action. So that's a mouthful. And maybe the most important phrase in there is as seen by others. Right? We were in talent review sessions with clients, and they'd be saying, well, using your name as an example, Patrice checks all the boxes. Her team loves her. Her colleagues love her. She has great experience. She's been in a number of functions, but she just lacks executive presence. And by the way, of course, you don't, Patrice. And then we would, we're the consultants, so we ask questions. We're like, well, what do you mean by that? And we got 100 different answers, literally gravitas and impact and whatever you could think of. And then people would say, well, I know it when I see it. And that's a really unhelpful definition of executive presence. But it's true, right? So visual is a big part, and dress and demeanor is a big part of it. So that set us about building this model of executive presence, which is, kind of a lot like a leadership model. It's been a great tool for us and for our clients to help them increase their impact and their ability to engage, inspire, align, and move people to action.
Dana, tell us a little bit about how you got into the field of image consulting and how that's impacted your ability to help other leaders with executive presence.
I very first heard about image consulting in 1994 and knew right then that it was what I wanted to do. I was born to do it. And I had always really liked working with the customers who were, looking for something for a trip. So these executives who own businesses, they had these really important jobs and they were just really unsure, what do I take with me? So then all came together when I started my business. I was like, I can help these women communicate through their clothes. A big part of what I do too is help take the stress out of getting dressed. So what I mean by that is once my clients know what they're going to wear and what's appropriate and what looks good on them, they can get dressed, and then that decision is done and they can feel confident and go on and just be really successful with the rest of their days. And so it's super rewarding. I love what I do.
Kelly, tell us a little bit about how you got into this type of consulting and especially on the intercultural aspects of it.
Thanks, Patrice. I worked for an international organization and I traveled abroad, managing international projects, things like that. And I always found that setting myself up for success, not only on the project, but I needed to understand how people worked and what they were going to take as a positive or a negative. The former company that I worked for also put us through cultural leadership courses because that organization is very international. So I just really liked how we present ourselves differently, either domestically from one coast to the other or internationally. In our breakout session, Barbara mentioned that she reads a lot, which just really spoke to my heart about etiquette and protocol, because you don't want to offend anyone. You want to be able to teach your message or get your message across about your business and not offend someone. So it just really spoke to me. I love cultural differences and I like food as well. So the food piece really, really spoke to me too.
Similar to Kelly, I've had that lovely experience of learning about cultures through companies and ended up getting training and learning Japanese. Really helps if you can at least greet people in the language that you're going to meeting them in and when you're going to their country. So Kelly, we'll start with you. Top 3 biggest mistakes that you've seen executives make, or leaders, emerging leaders oftentimes fall into this, in their executive presence.
Sure. I shared one of these in my breakout session. I was with this organization. We were presenting to the Iraqi delegation. And we had one of our executives, female, come in with a very short skirt and a very low top. Well, those from the Middle East, we know that we don't show a lot of skin, especially being female. So that's one of the mistakes that I had seen. And my boss at the time turned to me and let me go, do not, when you do your presentation, show up like that. I was like, well, of course not. And one of the things that we'll talk about, is pre-meeting. Like with anything, when you go to the grocery store, usually you make a list. So you're preparing yourself. It's these little things that turn into the big things. So if you're really presenting yourself as prepared or not prepared, it's going to show a difference in how you show up. And if you're trying to sell something for your business or you want somebody to believe in you, you have to have the full package.
Kevin, what are top 3 mistakes that you've seen across the years?
Well, I can think of one, and it's kind of a build on what Kelly just said, and it's just not knowing the situation you're walking into. That can be okay as long as you can be agile. I was in a meeting at Lockheed Martin with some very senior people in Washington, D.C. that included some customers. There are certain things you do and don't do when a general walks into the room, which I did not know, but learned very quickly. So it's really a lot about preparation, and when your preparation fails you, it's about adjusting quickly and being agile.
Got it. So what was it that you didn't realize you were supposed to do or not do?
Speak before the general.
You're not allowed to do that, huh?
Yeah,
so
and
you speak first.
And you stand up when the general walks into the room.
Okay, then.
Wow.
My brother who's in the military never bothered mentioning that particular one to me, but good to know. Dana, what would be top 3 mistakes that you most commonly see executives making, and potentially it's around how they're dressing, I'm imagine.
Executives and entrepreneurs, I think just everything we've all kind of touched on it. Everything has just gotten so casual. So a big mistake that I see is just showing up to meetings too casually as a default. Versus, again, we were all talking about that pre-planning, but I'll give an example. I went to a women's networking event last week, and I've been to a few since, the lockdown has been over and everything. And a few people showed up in just jeans and t-shirt. Like they just stopped by the networking event, while they were out doing errands, was the impression that it gave me, versus, who might I meet there? And then I think kind of a downfall with being too casual like that, just showing up like that, is you don't look like who you are. No one would ever be able to guess what you do for a living and want to approach you across the room. It's not saying no one will approach you if you have jeans and a t-shirt on, but company brand and such, you're just much more apt to be approached. And fit, I think fit is a big problem. It's so hard to know how clothes should fit. And in Colorado, especially, I think people tend to wear clothes a little too big versus too tight. And that can kind of downplay credibility as well. And then a third, and this is kind of a Zoom thing, is that a lot of times if you're wearing something that's really casual and it's oversized and it's black, on the Zoom screen, you just kind of blend in with the background. Patrice is a really good example of that. She's always got a really nice blouse on that's got some structure and always accessorized. So that really helps.
I have my earrings, but I'm missing jewelry. I realized this morning. Yeah, normally there's a necklace to create that extra V, like draw the lines down. Because Dana taught me I needed to do these things. That brings me to a really good point that you're making there, Dana. And I'm curious about instances where you've maybe worked with someone that you've been consulting on this whole topic and positive or negative impacts based on their lack or really great executive presence in terms of closing deals, making connections. Can you give us any examples about that you've experienced?
I know people really want leadership. And I think that being dressed a level above, even if it's in a super casual company, if there's something the leader can do to set them apart, the employees are going to recognize that. And it's going to be a step in the right direction. Connections, kind of like what I was saying, if you're at a networking event and you're well dressed, it's an invitation to want to get to know you. It doesn't mean, wear a suit to every networking event, but finding some way to kind of find something, interesting in your appearance that is an invitation to get to know you. I do know I had a client who was C-level executive in an energy company, and she would go to a lot of conferences, and she was pretty shy. And after we worked together, she told me that she noticed after working together that a lot more people, like in the hospitality suites and such, at the conferences, would approach her.
That's a great example of how those small differences obviously didn't change who she was or what she did or anything, but just in how she was perceived by others. Kevin, you brought this point up earlier as well about how others perceive us. So give us an example from your perspective, your lens around executive presence and someone that you may have worked with where you were able to affect this type of a change that helped them then either in closing deals, making better connections, attracting talent or retaining talent, something along those lines.
Yeah, thanks. So it's kind of a build on what I was talking about earlier. And the way I would summarize it, if I put it in the language of our model, the facet or the attribute is what we call resonance. And what we mean when we say resonance is picking up on verbal and nonverbal cues. And so I worked with a guy named Greg, and one of his colleagues said it best. Like, Greg's a great guy, really knowledgeable, very experienced, but he can't find the period. And so Greg a wonderful man. He loved to talk. He was very extroverted. And this is probably, I know this happened to me. I'm sure it's happened to some of you, either on the giving or the receiving end. When somebody's going on and on, you're kind of like, you had me at hello, right? Move on or ask a question. A lot of times with really senior leaders who are more extroverted, they have this issue where they're not seeing the effect that they're having. They're not paying attention to the fact that people have now picked up their phones or are looking elsewhere. That's a big one, especially for extremely powerful, successful leaders. They're not paying attention to how they're being received.
Have you seen any really great ways to get that point across to them?
There's two categories of these things. One category is preventions, right? So these are things you can do ahead of time. It's like, well, Greg, if you have a point to make, practice making it using the 2 breaths rule, right? Or a couple of sentences, and then force yourself to pause and ask a question, or even just pause and look around the room and see how people are responding. So that's a prevention, right? It's getting your messages to be really concise for the situation and then forcing yourself to stop after you've delivered that message. The other category we would call interventions, and that's things to do when you're in the room. So I try to help the leaders I work with just pay more attention to nonverbal cues, right? Because in most rooms, there are people who are more important, right, in terms of their decision making, their status or what have you. And so I would encourage them to pay attention to those people and to notice what's going on with their eyes and what they're doing with their body.
Kelly, let's jump in on yours. I know you've got some good examples about this. as well, especially the international aspects.
One of the things that I teach and help people work through is dining experiences. So which one is my bread plate? Which one is that my water glass? And especially in an international arena. And I keep going back to this. If you are there to sell a product or something you're passionate about, and you're having dinner, lunch, you're sharing a meal, if you don't understand how to conduct yourself in a meal, they don't think you're going to be able to conduct yourself in a business environment. So there are little things, and that's one of my mottos is little things make the big things. And I'll share this. I was at a nonprofit fundraiser dinner, and the person that was the MC is a local Denver celebrity. And this person I was at the table with, and they had done a lot of the talking. We were now on break. We were having dinner, and the person took their fork and stabbed their steak and started cutting it. And I just wanted to tell the person that the steak was dead. It's okay. You don't need to kill it again. While this person's a great MC, a great presenter, all I can remember now is they tried to kill their steak again. And that's just so offensive. And I really wanted to stop. It took everything I had not to go, stop doing that. It's so offensive. But it's those little things. And if you don't make an impression at dinner, that's a good thing too, because you've not offended anyone. That's one of the experiences I have certainly had.
So we're going to jump into what you were just talking about on getting ready. And Kevin was alluding to this a little bit as well on getting ready for things. So pre-meeting actions, et cetera. And I love this little slide that you put together to help us understand the different aspects around global communications and some of the things we can do as a 1, 2, 3 process.
Sure. Again, as you've heard all of us speak to some degree of pre-meeting action plan, if you know where the location of your meeting is going to be, whether it's a conference room or a restaurant or a coffee shop, know what it looks like, how you're going to present yourself. Do they have Wi-Fi? Do you need your laptop? Just understanding where you are and where you're going to meet someone. On Zoom, did you check to make sure your connection was already prepared? So I knew I was getting on this. So yesterday I took the time and made sure everything was working, my microphone, things like that. Here today, we have folks from all over. How do I have a meeting with you when I want to know your culture? Barbara spoke about this in our breakout. She reads about the countries she's going to be interacting with. That's a great way to present and really prepare yourself. I was in Russia. I do not know Russian. I know a couple of words. I know how to find the bathroom. I know where the stop signs are, things like that. I know how to say hello. But if you are having someone that's going to be a translator, you need to make sure that you speak in non-slang terms. They understand you, you understand them, because there can be some messages that are lost when the words are translated. So what does that look like? As we flow into 2, now you've prepared yourself. Did someone invite you to something? Are you the guest? Again, it goes back to your pre-planning meeting. Where am I going to be? What is the type of company? What do they look for in cultural aspects? Are they a casual company? Now that people are going back into the office, I also work with a financial institution, and it's become more casual. But, so what does that more casual look like? Business casual. And Dana, you can talk to this one. Business casual is always the question everybody comes up with. Well, what does that mean? Or are you going to be welcoming guest? Is it a multicultural guest? What type of team is it? And then, one of the things when Patrice and I first met, I handed her my business card and we joked about, well, let me just take a picture of it, or let me just look you up really quick on my phone. In different cultures, that business card, they're very passionate about that because that's who they are. And if you are traveling abroad and it is a different language, have the flip side in their language. So that makes them feel like you took the time to understand who you are and who they are. And then as we flow into, if you're having a dining experience, HBR, Harvard Business Review, did a study on diplomatic dining. Should you do a deal over a meal? They did 100, and I think it was 132 or 142 MBA students, each to have a very diverse group of a business. They were bringing two businesses together, very complex, and they were trying to increase profits. One of the groups did it all in a conference room, and the other group did it over eating and sharing meals. The group that actually shared the food, their profits went up $6.7 million over this time period. It's just building that trust, that relationship, and understanding how each other works. And then as I have here, eating with offense, it goes back to my story about the person killing the steak. Just understand in a business environment and there's men and women and the woman gets up to go to the restroom or something, men don't stand. We're all equals in a business environment. In a social environment, if you want to stand as a woman that departs the table, feel free to do so. So those little differences and people pick up on your first impressions are lasting, and it only takes a few seconds to make that first impression. As we flip all the way back to number one, it's just really doing that pre-planning and what is it that you really want to have come out of that interaction with those other people.
Kevin, what about pre-meeting action plan? You mentioned you touched on this before in a different sort of context than these things specifically, but what are some of the things that you advocate and recommend people do along the process of getting ready, being prepared, etc.?
Yeah, this is really rock solid content. I love this stuff, Kelly. The thing that I'll kind of double down on is the cross-language preparedness. So I know 10 phrases in 5 languages, and that's about it. Knowing how to say thank you in your host country, if you do nothing else but that, people will really appreciate it. So they won't expect you to be able to, master their language. But if you've shown that you've taken some effort to prepare and know just a few things in their language, I think that is super important. I also just want to talk about first impressions a bit. And, the stock phrase, you never get a second chance to make a first impression. And I think that is true sometimes. But I also think there's an opportunity for fun and humility in all of this, because we will all make mistakes. And I put in the chat earlier, which fork do I use? Right? So sometimes I'll be at a dinner table, and even though I now know which fork to use, I will turn to the person next to me and say, tell me again, do I work from the outside in or the inside out? I can't remember. And it's a way of showing that A, I'm paying attention, B, that I have some humility about it, and that I want to interact with that person. So I think we will all make mistakes the first time we're in a new country. And being humble and asking questions is just one other way of showing, we want to be with them at kind of the same level. And just watching what others do, right? If you're not sure, don't be the first one. Watch how others are doing it and then do the same thing.
Yes, being hyper observant and adapting. I liked your agile comment earlier. Dana, what are some of the things that you help people to understand?
Asking and just being really aware. So I think you can stalk people on social media really easily. So,
yes.
If you're meeting with an individual, kind of get an idea if it's a company website, that kind of a thing, or just what the feel of the company that you're going to be meeting with, or if it's networking or some other type of meeting like that. What are those photos, those event photos? What do they look like? And kind of dress to that. And then I think also is really thinking about, well, what are my goals for this meeting? Do I want to be really approachable? Do I want to be intimidating? Do I want to be the authoritative figurehead in the room? And then dressing according to that. And again, like we had been talking about, it's always easier to dress down if you're dressed up than it is to dress up if you're dressed down. And then also, I think there's a circumstance where you might really want to blend in. I've had people say to me, I want to look nice, but I don't want to be the person that walks in the room and is loud. So I think just kind of thinking about how others might be dressed.
Excellent point. So I know, Kelly, you had pointed out, I think this is a great illustration of the whole direct and indirect. Tell us a little bit more about this.
This one is definitely a cultural slide. Internationally, are you being direct or indirect? One of the things that Patrice and I spoke about as well, from a domestic standpoint, are you on the East Coast or the West Coast? Northeast, a little more direct, to the point. West Coast, a little more laid back. East Coasters, you're going to hear them say, no. Okay, what did that mean? West Coasters like, well, that's a great idea, but let's see if there are other ideas we can talk about. So it just really differs on your direct or indirectness. Barbara was on the phone and she made a comment that she had a lot of Asian experience, Japanese, Taiwan. So in coming from a group where I've experienced the Asian culture, women are a little more indirect, as is your business meeting. You need to be able to read your room. Kevin said this straight away was pay attention to your room. Mimicking is a great form of flattery. What do you see in your room? How are folks really perceiving themselves? How are you perceiving the room? I like to talk, but I also know that I need to say, let me pause there and ask, are there any questions? We have to be okay with sometimes silence is an okay thing. People are pausing. Some people consume things differently. They have to think about things. I have a sticky on my screen that says, I like myself better when I wait. So from a direct or indirect perspective, who are you talking to? I can be very loud and boisterous and say, this is the way you should do this. My team sometimes will say, Kelly, we already know that. I'm like, yes, I know, but I always like to hear myself say it one more time. You just need to know who your room is, who your audience is, and speak to that.
Great points. All right. So Dana, we talked earlier about different kinds of styles of individuals and powerfully speaking before you even open your mouth. I love that caption here, the influence about professional dressing. So tell us a little bit about considerations, remind us a little bit about what things we can do that we do have power over and how this situation might apply.
Speaking directly to this particular slide is that we make up to 11 assumptions about someone when we very first see them. And like Kelly had said, those impressions are made within mere seconds. Studies lately have been showing as little as a 10th or a 30th of a second, impressions are formed. So if you walked into an attorney meeting, this woman is an attorney. If she walked into the meeting as an attorney dressed like she's dressed on the left, you'd be like, well, wait, where's my attorney? In terms of credibility, I have expectations of how the attorney should walk into the room. I'm hiring the woman on the right. I'm probably not hiring the woman on the left. So I might go running and screaming pretty quickly.
Yeah, I love this image as well. Even on the left, she's got a V-neck on and jewelry and things like that, but so much more polished and put together on the right.
She's got the executive presence on the right.
Yes.
Wow.
The hair and the makeup, really. There's an ugly statistic about women who wear makeup and the fact that they'll make 20 to 30% more in annual income than women who do not wear makeup because of this exact image here of, professionalism. And I like this one as well. You want to talk to us a little bit about this example?
Just this kind of speaks back to the stature. I mean, he's kind of a little bit of a smaller guy. And the way you're dressed and the way you're appearing, it doesn't have to be just any one way. There's so much room for personal style, but he hasn't changed his hair. He's still himself. He looks like a really happy guy, but his body, he's got so much more stature. He's got those sharper angles in the shoulders. If it's a really casual meeting, that really casual atmosphere, it could even be a jean jacket.
Love it. All right, we're going to jump into the recap here. Distinguishing yourself from your peers with your speech, dress, gravitas, any one of these areas. Kevin, what would you say about things that you recommend people do to help to distinguish themselves?
I would reinforce what Kelly and Dana have just shared because it's all super important, right? Showing up like you belong in the place, the preparation part of particularly the second point here about speaking skills. It's like, what do you want to say and how do you want to say it for maximum effect so that you don't get caught in rambling? There's time and a place for rambling in more informal social settings, but if it's a more formal business setting with a business purpose, then I always go, and I'm a little bit more introverted, right? And so it's hard for me at times to find room. But it's not hard if I prepare. So I'm going to have 4, 5, 6 things that I know I want to say or do ahead of time and going to be clear and succinct and short and relevant. Spending as much time preparing your messaging and your questions as you do on what you're wearing, I think is a good balance.
One of the things I think several people brought up is how can we prevent ageism? And I wanted to see, Dana, what would be your thoughts on that?
We kind of discussed this before, but I think it's making sure that you're up to date with hairstyles for women, makeup, and for women and men. What you're wearing is current and up to date. Let's say your dress is kind of from the 80s or 90s. Immediately, people will assume, and it's not even a conscious decision, but assume that that's where your skill set is stuck. And especially so in that ageism, you want to be very current, modern, classic styles, knowing what's appropriate and what's up to date, I think can really help.
Kevin or Kelly, either one of you, professional practices on Zoom meetings?
We have this acronym and it's called FIELD, and the F stands for frame. It's where are you in the screen and what's behind you. You don't want to be like this and you don't want to be way back. And we have some fun videos that we use when we're teaching this.
Good points. I love this question about what's important to Americans. Kelly, is there any particular things culturally that you think are important to Americans in terms of establishing executive presence, polished presence?
For America, and I've said this a few times, depending on the area of the country, what are you going to be presenting? How are you going to be presenting yourself? So on the East Coast, you need to make sure that you're prompt, and early is on time. So always remember, early is on time. On time is late. Late is unacceptable. So you really need to make sure that you know from an East Coast standpoint, you are not going to babble. You're going to be very succinct, very direct, have your questions and your answers ready. So Americans really want to make sure that you are seeing the other person. On the West Coast, you need to be sure to make sure you clarify, did they really agree with you or are they just listening to you? And if I don't work very hard at it, I am originally from the South, and sometimes you might hear my accent come out, but we also have to realize that those that speak slowly are not less intelligent. Those from the North speak very quickly. You just need to make sure that in that pre-meeting prep that you're doing, what area of the country are you speaking with? Make sure that you're giving the attention that they are looking for. I think everybody understands the golden rule. How do you want to treat others the way you want to be treated? Then there's also the platinum rule. How do they really want to be treated? How do they want to be seen?
So Pete asked a really good question we didn't touch on in all of this, which is how is the definition of executive presence changing across generations between boomers, millennials, Gen Zs?
I think the what of executive presence is not changing. I think the how of executive presence is changing, and we need to be agile and adaptable to understand the differences between generations. And I may be a loner on this, but I actually think there are more similarities than there are differences between generations. There are clearly differences, and knowing what those are and integrating them into how you engage, inspire, align, and move people to action. There are some generational differences, but I think at the end of the day, it's person by person, because I've met a number of millennials who act just like a lot of the boomers that I work with. I think it's an individualized proposition. What is it that's going to engage, inspire, align, and move this person to action? And generational factors may play a role in it, and they may not. If you know the person, then you have more than half the answer.
That's a great point. And we're going to wrap up with this one last question from Rob here about when and how often to post on social media. We didn't touch on this aspect of creating executive presence by what you're doing on social media, but it is very important because we talked earlier about how people will stalk you or others and that you should be looking at them as well. The short answer, Rob, is on LinkedIn in particular would be a primary place as an executive for you to be posting, liking other people's comments, engaging in conversations. And you would also want to post something probably about once a week would be a reasonable cadence to it. Responding to things typically within 1 to 2 business days through LinkedIn is pretty common, demonstrates that you are part of the current era that understands social media is a thing we do have to respond to beyond just our inbox or answering phone calls, et cetera, and calling directly. Thanks, everybody. And a special thank you to our panelists for being here. We're right at the end of our time. I hope everybody came away with the answers to your questions. If you did not, feel free to reach out to our presenters. And if you guys need an introduction to any of our panelists today, let us know and we will help you get connected.